Sayın Esad, yayınımıza hoş geldiniz.
Mr. President, you are welcome on al-Ulusal TV station. My first question might be a bit strange, but I need to ask it, because in the Turkish and world media, there are a lot of information published to the effect that you are killed or that you have left the country. Can you please confirm that you are still alive and still in Syria?
First, I'd like to welcome you and your team to Syria. It's a pleasure for me to talk to you today, and through your station to the brotherly Turkish people. Clearly you can see that I'm here, and very much on the ground, not hiding in an underground bunker. These rumors tend to be abound every once in a while to undermine the morale of the Syrian people. I neither live on a Russian warship nor in Iran. I live in Syria, in the same place I've always lived.
Sayın Başkan, şimdi tabii daha ciddi röportajımıza başlamak.
As you know, in the last meeting of the Arab League, the seat of the Syrian Arab Republic was given to the opposition, and a discussion was opened about your legitimacy. Does that mean that your legitimacy has been withdrawn through this act of giving the seat of the Syrian Arab Republic to the opposition, and the fact that you are no longer represented in the Arab League?
Frankly speaking, the Arab League itself lacks legitimacy. It's an organization which represents Arab states and not Arab peoples. It has lacked legitimacy for many years, due to the fact that these Arab states themselves and their different positions do not reflect the will and the interests of the Arab peoples. Even when we were part of the Arab League, we were aware of this. Therefore, this league is not in a position to give legitimacy or withdraw it. The step taken was more symbolic than anything else, to create an illusion of illegitimacy. Real legitimacy cannot be granted from either international organizations, officials outside your country, or from other states. The Syrian people alone have the authority to grant or withdraw legitimacy. If they withdraw it, then you become illegitimate. And similarly, if they give you their support, then you are a legitimate president. Everything else is meaningless shenanigans as far as we are concerned.
There are decisions, measures and actions taken against your country by some Arab countries and in the Western world as well. On the other hand, the BRICS countries, which are observing the developments in Syria, have taken decisions different from those taken by the Arab countries and the Western country. How do you evaluate the activities, policies and decisions taken by the BRICS countries?
What you mention in your question emphasizes an important point. From the outset, the conflict in Syria was not entirely domestic. There are internal Syrian dynamics at play, but the underlying issues today are more directed towards redrawing the map of the region and the conflicting interests of the great powers. The creation of the BRICS bloc means that the United States will no longer remain the only global power in the world. Today, there are partners whose views and interests cannot be ignored when decisions and actions are taken in the international arena. The BRICS group does not support President Bashar al-Assad or the Syrian state. It supports stability in this region. Everyone knows that if the unrest in Syria leads to the partitioning of the country, or if the terrorist forces take control of Syria, or both of the above, the situation will inevitably spill over into neighboring countries and then create a domino effect throughout the Middle East and beyond. East, West, North and South. This will lead to a state of instability for years and maybe decades to come. On these grounds, the BRICS group supported the political solution in Syria against Western powers. As for some of the Arab or regional leaders which stood against Syria, it's well known that most of these countries are not independent in their political decisions. They act on foreign diktats. Internally, they might support a political solution, but when they're given their orders by the West, they must comply. Broadly speaking, this is the reality across the region and internationally.
Mr. President, for the past 2 years, we have witnessed conflict in Syria, armed conflict inside Syria. This conflict is supported on the one hand by the United States, France, Turkey and some Gulf countries. These countries say that the people are fighting your regime, and more than 100 countries have stated that you should step down. On that background, are you thinking of stepping down and allowing someone else to replace you?
Your question implies that a large number of Western states and their allies, including Turkey and a number of Arab countries, are against this president. At the same time, you're implying that his people are also against him. So how does he still remain in office? How can Syria remain steadfast for 2 years? I'm not bothered by foreign countries being against me. I'm a president elected by the Syrian people. We can conclude that for a president to take office or leave office is a national Syrian decision, to be taken only by the Syrian people and not by the states which call for that. Are these states concerned about democracy in Syria, or concerned about the blood of the Syrian people? Let's be candid. If we start with the United States, we find that it supported the crimes committed by Israel for decades, since Israel was created in our region. The United States committed massacres in Afghanistan and Iraq, resulting in millions being killed, wounded and disabled. France and Britain committed massacres in Libya with the support and cover from the United States. The current Turkish government is knee-deep in Syrian blood. Again, are these states really concerned about Syrian blood? The issue of the president will always remain for the Syrian people to decide, and no other country in the world has anything to do with it.
You said that what is taking place in Syria is mainly supported from the outside. But we are in Damascus, and we can hear the sounds of explosions, and there is always the sound of shelling at different distances. Why is this happening in Syria?
We are surrounded by a group of countries which are helping terrorists enter into Syria. Of course, not all of these countries are doing this intentionally. For instance, Iraq is against allowing terrorists access to Syria, but has certain circumstances which do not allow it to fully control its borders. In Lebanon, the situation is divided, with some parties supporting and others opposing sending terrorists into Syria. Turkey officially harbors terrorists and sends them into Syria. Some terrorists enter Syria through Jordan, and it's not clear whether this is intentional or not. As long as these terrorists continue to be smuggled into the country, we will continue to fight against them. This is only normal. It's actually a war in every sense of the word. These are not merely separate and dispersed security incidents. Terrorists are entering Syria in their thousands, and maybe in tens of thousands. It's difficult to set a precise figure. So it's quite realistic to hear the sound of battles in many Syrian regions.
Mr. President, you said that the Turkish government officially and publicly supports the terrorists and provides different kinds of assistance to those terrorist groups. But we know that quite recently you used to enjoy good and friendly relations with Erdogan and the Turkish government. What happened and pushed things to this situation?
Maybe Erdogan saw in the events taking place in the Arab world an opportunity for him to prolong his political life. This man's mentality is that of the Muslim Brotherhood, and from our experience in Syria with the Muslim Brotherhood for over 30 years, they are a group of opportunists who use religion for their personal advantage. He saw that countries that witnessed revolutions, or coups d'etats, or foreign interventions, brought in groups belonging to the Muslim Brotherhood to power. So he saw in that a great opportunity for him to remain in power in different forms for many years to come. He turned against Syria because he saw a personal opportunity to remain in power. In the beginning, he tried to interfere in internal Syrian affairs. Even before the crisis, Erdogan was more interested in the Muslim Brotherhood than he was in Syrian-Turkish relations, and even more than his interest in Turkey itself. This is the way this person thinks. When these circumstances occurred, he decided to stand by his personal interests and put them before Syrian-Turkish interests. As I said, he tried to interfere in Syrian internal affairs, and later, this Turkish government started to support the terrorists publicly in Syria. They have become deeply involved in the bloodshed in Syria. It's only realistic in this situation for relations to be severed between us.
Sayın Erdoğan, bu soru sorulduğunda
When we ask Mr. Erdogan about what happened to the Syrian-Turkish relations, he claims that he was honest with President Bashar al-Assad and offered him proposals about reform. But President al-Assad rejected those proposals. Why didn't you take into account the proposals made to you by Mr. Erdogan?
bunları uygulama gereği duymadınız?
Regrettably, Erdogan has never uttered a single truthful word since the crisis in Syria began. None whatsoever. I'm not exaggerating. The proposals he put forward were very general, to the effect that Syrian people should decide who should be president and what type of political system should govern them. I had previously spoken about these proposals in much more depth in many of my addresses. We're currently in the midst of preparing for a national dialogue in which all of the political groups in Syria will meet and decide on the best way forward. No matter how important Erdogan's proposals, they will not be more important than what the Syrian people want. Can there be anything more important than this? Whatever the Syrian people decide will be implemented. There is, however, a simple question that we should ask. If Erdogan claims that he put forward proposals to solve the problems in Syria, then what's the relationship between those proposals and supporting the armed groups? Today, Erdogan is recruiting armed groups with Qatari financing, providing them with weapons, medical equipment, and other logistical support on Turkish territory, and then sending them into Syria. Was this proposal part of those which he presented to me? Or were those proposals a mere facade which he used in order to reach his objectives? He knows that we supported dialogue from day one. We announced that we agreed to conduct a dialogue with all Syrian parties. When the first stage, which was often referred to as the peaceful stage, failed, they shifted gear and started to support the armed groups. Erdogan lies and uses those proposals as a mask. We accept advice from any party, but we do not, under any circumstances, accept intervention in internal Syrian affairs. It seems that Erdogan misunderstood our position. He understood that the brotherly relations between Syria and Turkey allowed him to interfere in internal Syrian affairs with the objective of overthrowing the Syrian state. But the situation was clear to me from the very early days.
Sayın Başkan, Türkiye'de
There are news stories in some media organs in Turkey to the effect that there are Turkish officers and security services personnel involved in the terrorist acts and helped the terrorist organizations, that they entered the Syrian territories and they were involved in direct activities in support of these terrorist organizations. Some media say that Syria will respond in kind against Turkey as long as Turkey is involved to this degree in these operations. What do you say to all these claims?
gruplara ev sahipliği yapmasına karşı.
As I said, the present Turkish government is directly contributing to the killing of the Syrian people. Some people expect Syria to retaliate, but we will not do it. Firstly, we are against crime, and therefore we reject criminal acts. Secondly, we believe the Turkish people are a brotherly people. Thirdly, this is what Erdogan wants. He wants to create a conflict between the peoples of Syria and Turkey in order for him to get popular support for his policies and restore some of his popularity. We will not fall into this trap for both considerations of principle and because our interests lie with the Turkish people. A conflict between our two peoples will not be in the interests of either Turkey or Syria. It will only make things more complicated. What we have done in the past 10 to 12 years since President Bashar visited Syria in 2000 was to annihilate the bad history between Arabs and the Turks. Now, Erdogan is trying to jeopardize this. We will not commit any act against the Turkish people. As for the Turkish intelligence services, up until this point, we have not captured any members of the Turkish intelligence services or the Turkish army. This does not mean that they are not involved. The intelligence services are providing support from outside Syria. They provide all the training, the equipment, the communications, and other forms of political and media support as required. From the confessions of many terrorists, we know that there are individuals in Turkey who are involved. But the basic principle of this involvement lies in the policy adopted by the current Turkish government. The fact that there is no intelligence personnel on the ground does not mean that they are not involved.
Türk hükümetiyle ilgili çok net
Your
açıklamalar
statements, Mr. President, have been clear concerning Turkish policies. Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said, "I would rather resign my position than shake the hand of President al-Assad if he remains in power." What does that say about the relations between the two countries?
I'm not going to dignify that with a response. Suffice to say that I was given an appropriate upbringing in my home, and clearly this is not true in his case. In the way he speaks, he does not embody the high moral standards of the Turkish people, which I witnessed all too clearly during my visits to Turkey. I, on the other hand, have learned from the high moral standards of the Syrian people, and hence I do not feel the need to respond. As to the bridges, my relationship with Erdogan was meant to reflect Syrian-Turkish relations. But when the Prime Minister, his government, and members of his government are involved in the bloodshed in Syria, these bridges have no place, neither between us nor between them and the Syrian people, who have no respect for them at all.
السوري الذي لا يحترمهم على الإطلاق.